Hello, everybody. Welcome. I hope you've been enjoying the 13th Annual Climate Leadership Summit so far. Thank you for joining us in our first concurrent panel session on greening the coast for resilience. I'm Russell Paez with the Sustainable Communities, and we have a great panel discussion lined up for you this afternoon. Before we get started, we'll be seeing a short video from Commissioner Marino.
But one of the main things we can do is really see how water is flowing from one county to another county. What is our canal system? How is it working? How do we have water storage? Where is our water storage? These are very important, and it's everywhere. It's not just in Palm Beach County. We are given flood maps, and they change, and flood areas change, and insurance in those areas then changes, which is a hit to everybody's pocketbook. So we have to be more cognizant of that. And then also that translates into building code changes. Because now if you're in a flood zone, you may have to build on stilts or reinforce more than you had to before. So those are some of the things that we're going to see in the future. And I think what's happening now is because of climate change, people are becoming less car-centric. And we are trying to make developments, and in the north end of the county, definitely, we're trying to make developments that service everyone so that you have walkability. Or if you want to get somewhere, you can get on a train. And being that I'm on the South Florida Regional Transit Authority, which is Tri-Rail, and we just celebrated our 100 millionth rider, that means we've taken 100 million cars off the road. So for our younger folks that don't want to drive, there are options. And I think we need to look at more of those options in the future. So golf courses are fabulous green open spaces. And even one of the courses that's owned by the county is an Audubon golf course. So you get healthy, you get to be outside, you get to enjoy the trees, the nature, the birds, and you get to be in Palm Beach County and frequent one of our golf courses, and that's a huge economic driver in our county.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Marino. Next, we're going to kick off the panel discussion. Today's moderator is Irela Bagay. Ms. Bagay is Miami-Dade County's first Chief Bay Officer, where she focuses on water quality issues, policies, and appropriations related to the health and recovery of Biscayne Bay. She acts as an advisor to the county mayor, county commission, and a liaison between county departments, county boards, external agencies, stakeholder groups, and local and state and federal governments. Previously, Ms. Bagay chaired Miami-Dade County's Biscayne Bay Task Force, leading the development of a final report listing a series of recommendations to improve Biscayne Bay's health and set a path forward for long-term recovery and restoration. Before I turn it over to Irela, if you have any questions during the session, please submit any questions through the Q&A tab, and questions will be answered following the panel discussion. Ms. Bagay, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Russell, for the nice introduction. And I hope you're all either enjoying your lunch or just enjoyed your lunch. So, and we're really excited that you could join us today for this panel discussion on greening the coast at the 13th Annual Climate Summit. I can't believe it's been 13 years. Well, on this panel in particular, as communities demand, place staking and natural-based solutions and are starting to reject grade-only infrastructure. This panel, we hope, will explore the opportunities ahead to reduce risk for Florida communities from sea level rise, storm surge, and a changing climate. The upcoming year promises to be a turning point as we all know, globally, nationally, and even locally, for many ambitious climate related projects. So, and for me personally, it's great that I was given the opportunity to moderate a panel with a group of such distinguished, experienced women, all working in the climate resilience and coastal protection space. Some who have had the pleasure of working with, and hope we can continue to learn from each other as we seek to make South Florida and my county, Miami-Dade, more resilient by developing innovative nature-based solutions to address sea level rise and protect our coastlines, and particularly improve water quality in our Biscayne Bay watershed. With that, I'll begin with a brief intro of our guest panelists. And as after I introduce all of you, I'd like for you to take each one, and I'll call on you, a moment to talk about how you're engaged in strengthening your community resilience with a focus on nature-based solutions for coastal resilience, particularly, with those that I mentioned before, water quality and habitat restoration. So with us today, it's my pleasure to introduce Deb Drum. She's the Director of Palm Beach County Environmental Resources Management. We also have Laura Gesselbrecht she's a Senior Marine Scientist for the Nature Conservancy, focusing on coastal restoration and climate change. We have Sabrina Sims from the Federal Emergency Management Agency with the BRIC Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Program for Region 4, and Suzy Torriente, Global Technology Leader for City Resilience at Jacobs. So I will start with Suzy, and I'll work my way back up.
Well, thank you, Arella. It's great to be here. Yeah, I can't believe it is the 13th. I think I've been to every single one of them. So great to be here in this great panel. Well, as many of you know, I joined Jacobs about 2 years ago. It'll be 2 years in January, after decades of local government work in South Florida. And so, over the last couple of years, I've had the opportunity to work on several climate adaptation studies around the country, actually, really all the way from Seattle down to Miami-Dade. And nature-based coastal resilience is always part of the equation, because what happens is that communities want sustainable and balanced development. It may not provide all the protection a community wants or needs, but really in combination with traditional gray infrastructure, it can complement and it can provide a lot more co-benefits to the community for the people and places, right, that we all love. And what I'd like to do, this afternoon is share with you a little bit about two projects. One is Tyndall Air Force Base, where I've been involved in the nature-based coastal resilience funding strategy and stakeholder engagement. And that was done in 3 phases, starting in 2020, where the coastal work was actually being looked at, and nature-based solution pilot projects were modeled and cost-benefit analysis were done. And the thought was, is there enough interest in stakeholder input and financing out there to do this type of work? And it was a absolute strong yes. So that evolved into this year, more stakeholder engagement and funding pursuits. And we've secured more than $6 million for those coastal projects around Tyndall Air Force Base, really outside and protecting the community. And we're really chasing about $13 million more. And next year we'll be working on developing a coastal resilience implementation plan. So really looking forward. So that's a really robust example. And the other thing that Jacobs is doing is we're working with the Army Corps' Engineering with Nature. We actually were just awarded a 3-year Department of Defense contract. And so with that, what we'll be doing is looking at Department of Defense facilities and looking at these nature-based solutions for the facilities in and around, developing a roadmap for the installations, and then creating technical guides. And so again, and all these things happen, not just in the installation, but with the community. So those are 2 pretty exciting projects that I'd like to elaborate on later. Thank you.
Great. Sabrina, you're next.
Awesome, thank you. My name is Sabrina Sims, and I work with the Department of Homeland Security under FEMA here in Region 4 within the Hazard Mitigation Branch of the Mitigation Division. And our goal, what we do, we manage hazard mitigation grants. And as you're aware, hazard mitigation is any sustainable action that reduces or eliminates long-term risks to both people and property from future disasters. So with mitigation planning, our aim is to break the cycle of disaster damage, reconstruction, and repeated damages. So hazard mitigation, including those long-term solutions, and again, reducing those impacts, we provide assistance via funding for eligible mitigation measures that reduce disaster losses. So we also, in doing so, it reduces vulnerability of communities to disaster and their effects. It also promotes individual and community safety and their ability to adapt to changing conditions and withstand rapid recovery from disruption due to emergencies, better known as resilience. We also promote community vitality after disasters to hopefully lessen response and recovery resources requirements after disaster. All in all, our goal is to help communities become safer and more resilient and work on ways to incorporate external financial assistance through partnerships. In terms of the BRIC program, I am the Supervisory Grants Management Specialist over the new Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program, which was formerly known as the Pre-Disaster Mitigation Program, PDM. This year for FY21, we are happy to announce that FEMA has made available $1 billion in funding for this program. And states and territories, as well as tribal partners, are able to apply for these grant programs. And within BRIC, our major priorities, and this is a huge one, is to incentivize natural hazard risk reduction activities that mitigate risk to infrastructure. We prioritize benefits to disadvantaged communities. That is also referenced in Executive Order 14008, which tackles the climate crisis both at home and abroad. And this is in line with the Administrator's Justice 40 initiative to promote equity. We also we work to mitigate risk to one or more community lifelines, which we can get into later, incorporate nature-based solutions, enhance climate resilience and adaptation, which is one of the newest priorities that we have under the BRIC program, and increase funding to applicants that facilitate the adoption and enforcement of the latest published editions of building codes. Thank you.
Thank you. $1 billion, nice. Laura, you're next.
Thank you. So the Nature Conservancy is doing several things related to making communities more resilient to climate change. And one of them is to analyze and publicize the value that our natural systems provide for storm surge reduction and flooding reduction associated with hurricanes and other tropical storms. For example, we recently valued post-Irma, how much the mangroves avoided damages in Southwest Florida and parts of Miami-Dade County. And that figure is $1.5 billion and protecting an additional 650,000 people from flooding. So our mangroves did a tremendous job in protecting communities. The other thing the Nature Conservancy is doing here in Florida is to develop innovative natural climate solutions funding mechanisms. One of the things we have done in the Mexico area is develop a coral reef insurance program that pays out after coral reefs are damaged or hit by hurricanes. And we're working on a feasibility study for mangrove insurance product right here in Florida. And we're at the stage where we've put all the modeling and all the analyses together, and we're ready to reach out to partners and identify a pilot site where we would implement that type of program. The other thing we're doing is some on-the-ground restoration work that is living shorelines that incorporate nature-based solutions in their design. And those solutions not only help bring more natural features to the Biscayne Bay area and Lake Worth Lagoon area, they also help protect our shorelines better. It's a combination of green and gray infrastructure. We're working with partners, of course, with that City of Miami Beach, Palm Beach County, to bring in those natural features, and together with the gray infrastructure, it helps build an even more sustainable shoreline. So there are a number of things we're doing. We're working on these things to help protect our existing natural systems like mangroves and coral reefs and salt marshes and seagrasses, because they do such an amazing job at protecting communities from flooding damages, but also restoring those systems when they do get damages and damaged with tropical storms, and looking for opportunities to restore areas that historically were these types of communities, but whether it's development or some other things that have come into play that have reduced the viability of those systems. So it's quite a bag of ideas that we're bringing forward, and it's wonderful to hear about the funding opportunities are out there, because that's what it'll take to keep moving these ideas forward. Thank you.
And last but not least, Dev Drum.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here representing Palm Beach County Environmental Resources Management Department. We are a group of 128 environmental professionals whose job it is to protect, restore, and just restore, protect, and all the natural resources here in Palm Beach County. And of that group, we have a group of about 22 people who are really focused on coastal restoration and coastal areas. And so Palm Beach County's innovative habitat enhancement program is centered on estuarine renewal in an urban setting. And that is really focused in our Lake Worth Lagoon area. A big shout out to TNC for some of those partnerships that have already been mentioned. Our journey on these kind of projects for living shorelines, I like to tell people we were doing resiliency projects before resiliency was a thing, before it was a cool thing. And we started actually in about 1997 with some of our first attempts in Munyon Island to do some coastal restoration and island restoration. And that first project took about 10 years to actually complete. And in some of those interim timeframes, from about 2000 to 2005, our Snook Islands project was sort of a pivotal project where we had a lot of lessons learned. We are so fortunate to have amazing staff who have really developed the blueprint for how these living shoreline projects can be done successfully. And between 2014 and 2020, we have about 43 acres of habitat created in Lake Worth Lagoon. And by 2023, we anticipate future projects are going to add more than 60 acres of habitat in Lake Worth Lagoon. And that's seagrass, mangroves, cordgrass, oyster reefs, bird nesting mounds. Just give a little bit of a reference to our updated Lake Worth Lagoon management plan. I know this panel, when we were preparing for this, we are all so passionate about this topic that I know there's no way we'll get through everything we want to say, but I can direct you to the Lake Worth Lagoon management plan, where a lot of our habitat restoration and island creation activities are referenced in more detail at www.lwli.org. And that'll take you to a totally digital, completely interactive management plan. You can't get a hard copy because we didn't make them. That will, page 72 of that action plan, HE2, will talk about that habitat enhancement, those projects. So we have a lot of experience. We've been doing this for longer than most people have. And so I think that we do have a lot to teach others in terms of learning from our experience and some of the approaches that we've modified over time when we have failed and learned from those failures. And I'm just really excited to share some of those experiences with this panel today, and very happy to be here. Thank you.
We're happy to have all of you. I'm going to get right into it. So, we've recently noticed a significant momentum in the efforts from the federal and state levels to address both of the causes and effects of climate change. And now that we have a few funding sources becoming available, particularly the infrastructure bill and the Resilient Florida Grant Program, these also include funding for green infrastructure and nature-based solutions for projects in these areas. And my question is, how realistic is it to be ready to scale up green projects to leverage this funding? And this could be, most of the questions are going to be for all of you, so it's just feel free. And for this particular question, Sabrina, if you want to get a little bit more into the BRIC program, that would be great. But whoever wants to jump in and start, that would be great. If not, I'm going to call on you.
I was trying to unmute, I'm sorry. So we were talking, you're asking about, various ways to be able to fund some of the nature-based programs, right? And so BRIC, that is like one of their, as I mentioned earlier, one of their top priorities. When we look at applications for the BRIC program, they're scored on several different factors. We look at projects that are submitted from a technical standpoint as well as a qualitative standpoint. And there are points incurred for both. And under the technical criteria component for BRIC, out of 115 points in that, nature-based solutions accounts for at least 10 of those points, right? Then you get another 10 points for infrastructure projects if it falls within that category. Then there's another 15 points that can be incurred for mitigating risks to one or more of FEMA's lifelines like safety and security, whether it be food and water, shelter, emergency response, which falls under safety and security. There's several of the lifelines that will be covered, but in the whole composite of the project itself, again, within these points, we've got infrastructure projects, we've got mitigation to risk to more than one lifeline, nature-based solutions. We've got building code adoptions. I see that we have a question in the queue asking about what laws need to be strengthened. Immediately, I think about building code adoption, because when we look at statewide adoption of building codes, this enables stronger local community codes. So by having a statewide building code, communities themselves can then start to develop standards that are tailored to mitigate their location-specific risk, right? For example, we have Miami-Dade and Broward counties have instituted hazard-specific codes to reduce hurricane damage. And so that we can look at that on a local level to be able to piggyback off of the statewide building codes, then that would be a good place to leverage that opportunity, as well as gain points for the BRIC program. As a matter of fact, we had recently, let's say, what year was this? It was adopted in 2002, and then we started the state started working on a program to adopt all of them. This is actually a sample of that project for adaptation or adoption rather of the building codes for Florida can be found in FEMA has what's called a mitigation action portfolio, which is, it's a huge product that has various projects listed within it. So you have like abstracts of projects where states, locals, partners can all go in and see examples of successful projects, the partnerships, the various lifelines that it covers, the community benefits, as well as the cost of the programs, projects, that is, the areas that it was impacted, and more. So with FEMA, BRIC is not the only program that we have that's available to tap into for these resources. We encourage various partnerships because as you guys may be aware, most of FEMA's programs will have a cost share, usually 75% on the Fed side, 25% on the applicant side, and that would depend because it varies for disadvantaged communities and things of that sort as well as with our tribes. But in any event, we have the BRIC program, we have the flood mitigation assistance program, other programs that we have, as I mentioned, the legacy pre-disaster mitigation program, as well as our hazard mitigation grant program. So there are many options out there for federal assistance, but then again, pointing it back, in you guys' direction where we find opportunities to leverage that funding, right? So not just the federal dollars, but we work with one another and work with our neighboring communities as well to have these conversations to see which projects they're working on or intending to work on, or identifying the problems and the gaps in where funding might be needed, because there's a lot of overlap oftentimes, right? So then we look to our partners that are working on all of these fabulous GIS components that we can use to kind of do layers and overlapping different projects and then see where we all come together. And I'll leave it at there because I think I kind of went further than your question. So I'll leave it there because I'll start to ramble about all the good stuff that's happening.
No, it's great. It's great. And for those who joined us late, I think there was a question that I saw that what does BRIC stand for? And so if you want, I can go ahead and restate that. It's a program, a grant program that FEMA offers, and it's called Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities. So so back to my question, and maybe Laura or Deb, you can talk about maybe some of the projects that you're thinking about scaling up for some of this funding. Or
I just wanted to throw in a thought on this, because we've been doing this for a long time and we know we can successfully build these projects in lagoon settings. But the fact of the matter is, most of the shorelines in South Florida are privately owned. And so we think that as a really next step, because we're really encouraged that all this new funding is available and that people are getting really serious about addressing resilience. But to really help communities overall, it's got to go beyond habitat restoration, and it really needs to start engaging residential communities to really start making that connection with people who live along the shoreline. That is, they are looking at gray infrastructure that is worth it, and it makes sense to include green infrastructure as part of that complement. And so cities and municipalities, they often have needs with not as much money. And so with tapping into some of these federal sources of money is a great opportunity for them. But we are encouraging the cities and municipalities in our community to go ahead and put forth that extra effort, to go the next mile of just effort and financially finding partners that lets them get green infrastructure right now incorporated into their plans and their programs, because it's going to be with us forever, and they need to take that first step. And now's a great opportunity with all the funding opportunities that are out there to try to make something happen. So that's my 2 cents on that.
And I want to second that. What Deb is saying is absolutely right. And the way we can help do that is do some pilot projects that show the success of those green and gray infrastructure. Gray infrastructure can work very well, but it doesn't provide that natural system. It doesn't help provide the fisheries, or in the case of our beaches, it may not provide the long-term success of our beaches. Florida is based on a tourism economy. If we don't continue to protect and restore and enhance our natural systems, even if it's incremental through doing these living shoreline projects and making them strong by combining the green and gray infrastructure and engaging those private interests, it's so key. Someone asked, how do we at the Nature Conservancy decide which projects to do next? Well, we typically partner with a local government, a federal government, to do projects. So we're always looking for those partners that are open-minded to use the green gray infrastructure, and we bring some of our expertise and know-how along with that, and some of the studies we've done in the past that show the benefits of these types of projects. So it is incremental, and we need to gear up in a big way. I myself live on a short canal in Broward County, and I am not aware of any seawall in the area that shows a green component to it. So it'd be nice to see that. I personally have mangroves in my backyard. We have no seawall. I need some kind of help there to prevent erosion, and many people are in the same boat. So if we can provide some demonstration projects, I think they could go very far. People are open to new ideas. So I'll leave it at that.
Arella, let me just add to what Laura said.
I was going to ask you to jump into that.
Well, because I wanted to actually call out that the work that we're doing in Tyndall, TNC is a big partner. And actually the grants that we've been successful, they're the recipient and helping design and construct. So, and I also wanted to mention, well, 2 things, kind of a shout out to the compact partners in South Florida, because they're really poised to receive a good amount of money through the new Florida Resilience Grant. So congratulations. I know that still has to go to the legislative process, but I think they did really, really well deserved. But in terms of other funding sources, what we've been able to do at Tyndall is a combination. There's one program that's called a Readiness and Environmental Protection Integration Program, REPI. And that's a Department of Defense grant for to address encroachment on military installations. And the way we wrote the grant was the encroachment was water. It was sea level rise and flooding. And so we were able to get funding for living shorelines, oyster reefs, and submerged shorelines. Again, not in the base, but around the base. And then that provides community resilience and the benefits, the other co-benefits, the recreational and the ecosystem as well. And also working with Bay County, working with the local municipality, we were able to get $500,000 to do a marsh enhancement through their Restore Act funding. So I think it's really a combination of funds, and it's really location, because a lot of times you can get a certain amount of money for a certain type of project depending on where it is. And so I think you have to be pretty clever and look for a variety of funding sources.
I totally agree with all of you. And I think that in South Florida, we really need to start showing and telling the story and showing big projects, not little projects, and really educating the public on what really the benefits of green infrastructure. I mean, mangroves bring so many benefits, and we really don't talk about it enough. But we can't really do much about this. And I'm going to mix it up. I'm going to bring in a question from the audience. We can't really do much without policy and the right policies in place. So this question is from Diana Umpierre, and she asks, what laws and regulations need to change at the federal and state level, and sometimes local level, by the way, to ensure projects they fund provide nature-based solutions? It seems like the way benefits are calculated in NEPA, alternative analysis, is not working well. And I don't know if anyone can jump into that.
I'll just say that permitting is a big hurdle, and it varies geographically in Southeast Florida. For example, Biscayne Bay is a very tough nut to crack to do anything in the bay, whereas in Lake Worth Lagoon, they've done an amazing job of making these slightly offshore islands that provide protection to the shoreline and a lot of nature benefits. So, and also permitting can take a lot of time, and doing it piecemeal, individually, project by project, it's almost insurmountable. So some type of project that looks at the big picture. South Florida is under severe sea level rise risk, and sometimes we have to make accommodations and change the way our permitting is done, do things that don't harm the environment, but yet further the protection of the environment as well as the people on shore. So I'd love to see some changes to those rules.
Yeah, and that's why when we served on the Biscayne Bay Task Force, we deliberately had a section focused on nature-based infrastructure, and we will be engaging, hopefully partnering with the Nature Conservancy on a living shoreline guide. So stay tuned, because that will actually provide the pathway on some of the challenges that we've had, that we really need everyone to kind of update and figure out what can and can't be done in the Bay. Moving forward, I have another question about, implementing innovative solutions at the local level. And, perhaps some of you can talk about some of these projects and the layered approaches to that, including permitting and policy changes that are needed. Any specifics?
I can give some specific examples, but one of the things that's been like a really linchpin to our success is the relationship with the marina community and the coastal businesses that have projects. So when we permit projects, we do so to allow the use of beneficial material. If it weren't for, it's kind of ironic, if it weren't for some of the redevelopment occurring along the coast, we wouldn't be able to afford just the material to do things like fill in dredge holes that are these anoxic dead zones in Lake Worth Lagoon that aren't providing any habitat benefit whatsoever. So identifying those particular spots and then getting with partners who need a place to dispose of material, right? And we use that to fill the holes and to bring everything up to a grade that is then supportive of oyster reefs or seagrass habitat. That's really critical, an innovative way of looking at things that may not seem like those would be partners that would make sense to do restoration along with development, but we've made a way to make it really beneficial for all different segments of the community. And so we work together. Permitting, I'm glad that Diana asked the question about permitting and some of the policy challenges, because those are real challenges and we need to evolve our regulatory look with a resilience lens. We've got to make it easier for people to do the right thing with regard to green infrastructure and the development of habitat. We shouldn't be looking at the regulatory world the same old way. They would be a regulatory agency might be so focused on an impact to 0.25 acres of seagrass, right, which is ephemeral to start with. It might be there one year, it might not be there the next, as opposed to looking at the overall benefit. I mean, we have a goal in Lake Worth Lagoon to have this complete ribbon of green, and it's all enhanced habitat. We have birds nesting in areas before we've even taken the construction equipment off of it. And we're getting tag birds from Brevard County and from Indian River County and Lee County. I mean, we have resources all over the place using like nature, using these resources that we're creating in Lake Worth Lagoon. We should be incentivizing those kind of activities as opposed to going back to some old regulatory guidebook where we just really need to evolve our look on those things.
That's it. I've got to jump in on this one because, you know, these old guidebooks, I think that's a very important point. You know, when was the last time some of these rules have been modernized? Are we, you know, dealing with sea level rise and future conditions, but we're dealing with rules from the 80s, right? And I think a lot of times that's what's happened. And you know, Arella, what you and I used to talk about, when was the last time Durham chapter 34 or 24 was really reviewed in its entirety, right? From beginning to end with an eye towards sea level rise. So to me, your question about innovative solutions starts with collaboration and breaking down silos, being interdisciplinary. Because if you talk to engineers alone, they'll be quick to tell you that green infrastructure, you know, is not going to be everything, and it's not going to reduce all the flood risk. But then you go into communities and they don't want all the gray infrastructure. And I think that the recent Army Corps Back Bay studies is my God, what a testament to that. That really backfired, you know. And so I believe that kind of collaboration, cooperation, and really more hybrid solutions, quite frankly, you know, because then you can really start to look at how you mix in both. And I'm just going to keep going back to Tyndall. I know we're in South Florida, and I'm driving you all up to the Panhandle, but I think that there's a lot of things we can learn. You know, geographically it's different, but it's still on the coast, and the approach is wise. They decided to rebuild the installation of the future when Hurricane Michael hit, and so inside the base, there's a new facility standard. It's a new master plan. It's a more livable, walkable community, but it has higher elevation standards, right? And it has stronger wind standards. And then this whole nature-based approach with the community outside the baseline is those layers, like you were saying earlier, layers of defenses. And so you start with layering your protection, you know, as far as you can go, and then all the way into inside the fence line and the buildings and everything like that. So it's really a combination of all that collaboration, interdisciplinary work, and just don't look at things in one way. Start to look at a variety of different things in a variety of different ways and start to piece it together.
I totally agree. And, you know, and again, you mentioned Back Bay, and what a great opportunity we have to really have that green infrastructure conversation now that the public saw what could, you know, what could happen if we don't start talking about incorporating more nature, helping nature solutions, I like to call it. I have another question regarding the value and comparison of adaptation strategies for a particular location. How do you do that? And, you know, if you can give any example of a natural measure and versus a structural seawall, for example, what criteria do you use? Are there any metrics around that? And even Sabrina, even for funding, like how do you distinguish both? Like, is there a process that you all go through?
In terms of?
When you look at, like, let's say you look at an application for protection, storm protection, for example, and you're looking at a green infrastructure solution versus a gray infrastructure solution?
There's not a whole lot that separates the two, other than that component in terms of the scoring that I mentioned. So for every project that's funded through BRIC, for example, we look at those criteria that I mentioned. There are 6 criteria for qualitative review, which is risk reduction, risk reduction, resiliency, effectiveness, climate change and future conditions, implementation measures, population impacted, outreach activity, and leveraging partnerships. And they all carry various weights. And then on the technical side of the house, when we look at the evaluation criteria for that, we offer incentives for elements that are valued by FEMA, which to be considered for funding, they must show that a particular project is cost effective and technically feasible, meaning that the project is designed to increase resilience and public safety, reduce injuries and loss of life, reduce damage and destruction of property, critical services, facilities, and infrastructure from natural hazards. So within that technical criteria, the incorporation of nature-based solutions will warrant a project 10 points. So that's a separation piece when we talk about nature-based solution projects in particular, because when you talk about those gray projects, they may or may not have, more than likely won't have that nature-based solution component. So to receive a point allotment for this criteria, the sub-applicant must indicate and describe how the project incorporates one or more nature-based solutions, which equivalent to sustainable environmental management practices that either restore, mimic, and or enhance nature and natural systems or processes, and support natural hazard risk mitigation, as well as the economic, environmental, and social resilience efforts for the project. So those solutions are those that use those approaches. They're not to be limited by, they can include rather restoration of grasslands, rivers, floodplains, wetlands, dunes, reefs, etc. Living shorelines, soil stabilization, aquifer storage and recovery, as well as bioretention systems. So if you have a project that is that falls within those categories, then you, for this particular grant program, would separate yourself from other applicants and achieve those points and be able to score higher than another applicant, which will make your project most likely be chosen.
So Arella, the metric we use is dollar signs. And so I have, it's funny, our commissioner started this session by talking about golf courses, and I have 2 golf course examples of where we built projects. One was at City of Lake Worth Beach, and they had a completely failing seawall. It failed. And we replaced it with 100% natural shoreline. And through multiple storms, that was in 2005 that we did that. And then through multiple storms, the natural shoreline has demonstrated that it has tremendous resiliency and it protects the shoreline, and they don't have erosion, and they don't have the long-term infrastructure costs of seawall replacement. And at the same time, you've got critical shallow water habitat, and you're seeing seagrass, oysters, invertebrates, fishes, birds, everything is using the area. So, and it's saving them money. So I think it's really important as resiliency practitioners. I don't know if that's a thing, but it is now. But I will say that if we're going to call ourselves that, we're going to need to translate this for communities into saved dollars and protected communities. And that goes for everybody in the community across all different ethnicities and races and economics and all of that. All the demographics have to be included in that, but it's not like a one size fits all. And it needs to affect everybody, and it will affect everybody. So the other example, the town of Palm Beach has their par 3 golf course, same situation. Their town engineer is telling us that because of in the early 2000s, we built a living shoreline project that included mangroves, and they think that we've added years and years to the infrastructure longevity of the seawall that they do have there. So I think it comes down to showing, I don't know who it was that said, it really is going to take a combination of the green and gray in order to be completely effective with what we're dealing with sea level rise related to climate change. And as long as we get our heads around that and get the regulatory world to catch up with us in terms of our thinking about how to move faster through that, I think that we'll be on a good path.
One thing I'd like to add to that is, and that's just including the value of protection of the shoreline in that analysis. But we should also include the value of the added nature value, the added fisheries, the added health of the water, water quality, marine mammals that might need those seagrasses to live on. So the value goes way beyond when you have a living shoreline. It goes way beyond just the shoreline protection. It really delves into the natural system and then all the people that rely on that natural system. There may be communities that fish and help provide protein sources for themselves by fishing along the coast. And if we just have a seawall, the fishing won't be nearly as good.
Well, that's a perfect segue for another question we got from the audience, which is water quality monitoring and overall water quality testing is extremely expensive, which is the reason why we have been restricted to monthly water sampling in the past. Are there any specific funding opportunities for water quality studies?
No.
No.
We-
We're always
if I'm wrong, there's a lot of people watching this and a lot of people involved in the summit. And if I'm wrong, please call me 561-233-2400. I want to hear from you to know if there is a way to get some grant funding to help do water quality monitoring, because if so, we will be all over it.
so would
One thing, typically when the Nature Conservancy does projects, we do pre-post monitoring, and oftentimes we do include water quality monitoring, but that's for a specific property or a specific project in a specific location for a specific time period. It helps, but it's not the need that needs to really be filled.
Yeah, the project required, like the permit required monitoring associated with projects, you must do and you must budget for as part of the project. But that what we're really looking for are those long-term trends and how we're doing over time and how the restoration needle is being moved in the right direction with regard to water quality over a long period of time. That's been a battle. You and I have been facing that for decades. I hate to say it, but it has been. And that's just always a challenge for people, is to really fund science, really good science that you need to be able to tell trends over a long period of time, which is what restoration projects need. That's always been a challenge. It probably always will be, but maybe we need to think about it differently through the lens of resiliency. I don't know.
well,
Yeah,
I mean,
maybe incorporating a project or a study like that into part of the phase, one of the phases in terms of your larger project, that in order to complete this larger project, this needs to be a phased out component specific to water quality monitoring in order for us to move on to the next phase of the project. Like you need those results in order to be able to justify the next portion of the project. So that is something that I think that we looked at in the phase realm. And with that, I think about our EHP partners, our environmental and historic preservation partners, which I can reach out to and see if we can find some examples of of projects that have utilized the water supply system evaluation methodology, or what have you, and been approved for a portion of a phase. So I wouldn't say that I can't say that it's specific funding for that, but I think that with our hazard mitigation grants, that if we include that as a part of an application, as a part of a phase, then you're likely to get approved, especially with this new piece in terms of the heightened sensitivity and awareness of nature-based solutions and climate change. So in this environment that we're in, I would say schedule some time with your state hazard mitigation officer, who will in turn reach out to us, and collectively we can sit down and brainstorm about how we can get that portion of the project funded.
great. We may come visit you together.
Yeah.
It's true. I mean, we get funding for projects, but then we have to show results. But the only way to show results when it comes to water quality is with water quality monitoring. That doesn't come with the grant money for the project, usually.
And that's when we think about our external partners as well. Even partner up with our other federal government agencies, like your EPA, for example. EPA may already be having some type of studies going on, or one of our, or local college or university may have some students that are conducting water quality studies. So those are additional external partners that we may or may not think about, as we're think about, not just funding for it, but it's still a resource, so the college students, they're technically free, but they may have funding sources or grants coming to them university to be able to fund those projects that we can piggyback off of or use that data to help with our projects that we're trying to get off the ground as well, if that makes sense.
I would add too, there's opportunities for citizen-based science. It will be a lot cheaper than, paying for staff, or maybe not as cheap as graduate students, but certainly, and there are programs, I know of some in Southwest Florida where they use citizen science volunteers. They train these people up. Many of them stay for years. They get high quality data out of it. Of course, there's the cost of analysis once the collection is done, but that does help reduce the cost to some extent.
The Lake Worth Lagoon Keeper here, Ronaldo Diaz, in our community is very active in a kind of a citizen science approach, and he has been very proactive at getting the right data that is helpful, and that has been helpful. We don't have nothing, of course. We invest some of our own monies for monitoring as well. It's very hard to find water quality partners for the as there's different levels of water quality data that depends on what you want to use it for. We're not flying blind, but we could always use more money for research that's applied research that is for a purpose of demonstrating success in our restoration projects.
Yeah, and Miami-Dade the same. We have Miami Water Keepers and a number of other organizations constantly out there, water quality monitoring. FIU has their buoys. They're giving us real-time information, but it's not, it's a huge watershed. There's not enough information. So, it is a challenge, but no, well, I guess we'll get there. And I know that this is not part of this panel, but, all this water quality data is all innovation, and it's just, it's tech, it's water tech, it's blue tech. And I think that there's a big opportunity to have that discussion moving forward on how that can even become economic development drivers in our own communities. So I don't really think we have time for any more questions. But is there anything that you want to share to just kind of close up the conversation on green infrastructure and protecting our coastlines?
I would just say that I think this panel has shown how important those partnerships are. TNC is partnering with all these groups here and more, and the strength of partnerships and the collective expertise is really so important. And the innovation that comes from working across many different partners. So I just want to, point out how important that is.
And I'd like to thank, as a special shout out, like I said, to TNC. They've been a great partner. We have so many partners, so many of them, and we couldn't do the work that we do without them. And that's just a critical piece of it. And I'm so encouraged by all the work and all of the people on this panel and everything that everyone's brought forward today, because I think the future is optimistic with green infrastructure and the combination with gray and green. I think there is a lot of potential there, and we're on the cusp of some really big things. And with Sabrina bringing us all this money, I think that there's just a lot of reasons to be optimistic moving forward. And it doesn't mean that it's not going to be difficult, but the most things that are worth it are at some point. So
I got to tell you, here at FEMA, though, we welcome these conversations. We are thankful for your partnerships. We want to keep going and engaging in these conversations and thinking outside the box. I mean, like with this BRIC program, it literally incentivizes communities for thinking outside of the box and thinking of creative ways to reduce hazards and help the community be more resilient. So I would love to continue this conversation, beyond this platform here. And I encourage you all to do the same. And do not hesitate to reach out to us. Again, we're here for you in Region 4. I will put my information into the chat so that you can reach out to my team and I directly. We're happy to have one-on-one consultation with you to talk with you about your respective project plans and pair you up with the appropriate people at the state level as well to continue those conversations and figure out how we can get these things partnered up and going and continue the conversation. So thank you.
Thank you. Any last words, Susie, before we wrap?
Well, I know we're at the hour, so I just want to say something I've been thinking about is that resilience planning and investing to me needs a new business model. And it's not a left or right issue in government. And it just, in the private sector, it doesn't fall neatly in one business unit or one market, let's say. And so to me, it's all about that multidisciplinary collaboration that we've been talking about. And, you know, I think all decision makers need to start thinking like chief resilience officers and really taking the big picture approach.
Well, thank you, ladies. It's been wonderful, way too short. Thank you, Russell, for being our, you know, orchestra director. And I hope to see you all next year in person.
Yes, and I just want to thank you, Arela, and to our amazing panelists. Thank you so much for this amazing conversation. Next up, we have another pair of concurrent session for you to choose from. And so to join those sessions, please go back to the CVent portal and click on the link for the next session. So again, thank you so much, and bye, everybody.
Wonderful speaking with you all.